Hi guys, here I'm going to show you how to import web data using VBA macros in Excel. This one's going to get interesting, but don't worry, I'm going to cover everything step by step and go through the macro line by line so that by the end of this tutorial you understand exactly how to do everything. And anything I don't have time to show you in this tutorial will be in the premium course on TeachExcel.com. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to TeachExcel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. First thing to do, let's go find some data to import. So go to our web browser, and I'm going to stick with financial data since it updates, so it makes for a nice example in Excel. Let's go to finance.yahoo.com. And let's see here, it's after hours. So let's do the Euro USD exchange rate because we have a number that will change. And this time, unlike the last tutorial with Excel's stupid web import, we are not limited by the table interface because if you remember from that tutorial, we could only pull in these guys down here, this one and this one. Now let's get what we really want, which is this guy right here. So this tutorial will show you how to pull almost any piece of data that you want from this web page. So this is what we're going to get. But what I'm going to do now is we're going to go back to Excel and I'm going to show you the macro that we're going to use. I made it super easy to follow. And now let's go to the VBA window, Alt F11. Now I'm going to increase the text size. And let's go ahead and close these dudes. Okie dokie. Now go ahead and download this file from teachexcel.com so that you can follow along with me. I'm not going to force you to write it out by hand. All of this, what you see, this is the macro. You can see that it's not that big, and I have it heavily commented. So now it's called Get Web Data. And okay, back up to these guys. So these are the variables for the macro. And yes, as you may have heard me say before, technically speaking, you don't need to list these up here. It is good practice. It's not required in most cases, but it's good practice, so I went ahead and did it for this one. We've got something that is going to send our request to the website, something to get the request back, something to hold the HTML, then a variable to hold the website we want to go to, and the data we want to get, which is price. Now we can move into the meat of the macro, and the first part here is one of the few things you're going to have to change to work for your own macro. So we have the website variable, and what we're going to do here is just store the website that you want to go to. So this is the URL of the page that has the data you want. So this is a URL from earlier where I was testing it with another stock or just a stock. And what you want to do here for this one, very simple. We just go back to our browser, go up here to the URL, and copy the entire URL, including the HTTPS. Now we can go here and delete everything within the double quotation marks and paste our new URL. Perfect. The next line, as it says here, create the object that will make the web page request. Don't worry about this. You don't have to do anything with this. All that it does is it creates the object, basically the thing that's going to take our values from the macro and then go into the web to do something with it. So this website is our value here. It's going to use that to go to the website. So set request equal to an object, and now that request equals this object right here, we can use request down here and do some things with it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to open the request. So I've got this right here, and I have these things sectioned like this because in most examples they are within a with block. I don't have that here because I thought it might be a little bit easier to just write it out like this, and if you don't understand what that even means, then don't worry about it. Just know that I wanted to make the code as easy as possible to read. So now we have our request object and we got to do something with it. So the first thing that we want to do is to go down here and type request.open. And that's basically what gets everything started. And you don't need to change any of this. So I'm going to say 98% of the time you're not going to need to change any of the arguments here. This get is the type of request that we're going to make. This right here is our website, so our website variable. You could just copy paste this here, right here, but I think it's a little bit easier to edit the macro this way. And this right here controls if it's synchronous or asynchronous. Do not change this. If you change this, you're going to need to change the rest of the macro. Leaving this as false is going to make your life really easy. So if you don't know even what asynchronous or synchronous means, then don't worry about it. Just leave that the way it is and your life will be easier. Okay, let's add a little space here. I'm gonna add a little space here too. This guy right here is a fun little thing. So when I send, or when the macro sends a request to this website, it says, hey, this website right here, give me some data. But it doesn't only say this. It says a bunch of other stuff to it in what's called a header. Now, I don't know how much you want to know about that, probably not too much, but right here is where we set the request header. So here's our request, and then dot set request header. And so what we are doing is we are telling the website this right here. And what this is it says if the website has been modified since this really early date, which it should have probably been modified since then, send us the new data. But in layman's terms, this line right here, once again, don't need to do anything with it. It just means we're going to get fresh data. You can comment this line out and see that your data won't update the way you want it to. So that's if you run the macro once and then keep running it over and over again. Next thing, very simple, we have to tell the request to send, so we do request.send. Now we've sent a request. We're going to wait on a response. All that's done behind the scenes, no problem. And then down here is where we're going to get a response. Technically, you don't have to convert the string here into Unicode. Don't worry about that. It's just to make things a little bit easier with character encoding. But basically what this does here, this request.response body is what actually gets the response. And then we're going to put that into a variable response. strconv just converts it from one encoding to another. And this is what says the encoding to convert to. But like I said, don't worry about this. This is the part that gets the data. This is where the data is now stored. Now what we need to do is to kind of put it in a different format. So we're going to take this response over here, and we're going to type html.body.innerHTML equals the response. That way, we can then use the HTML variable to access elements from within the web page. So if I go up here, the HTML variable is an HTML document type. And that's a special type that allows you to essentially hold a web page and iterate through different elements within the web page. So that's a special little guy right there. And you don't have access to that by default, but I'll show you how to get it in a moment. So now once we have an HTML, all we have to do is figure out what we want to get. So this is the second part that you're going to have to edit. Here we have the price variable that's going to store our price. Here we have HTML. We can now use that because we set it right here. And we can use these little guys right here. Get elements by class name. And there are a couple more I'll show you in a moment. And this is what allows you to get the actual data. So what we're going to have to do in a moment is go back to the web page, find the class name for the data we want to pull in. In this case, it's a really weird class name because it's from Yahoo. Or any big company is going to have weird class names like this. And then once we get the class name, we need to do some funky stuff over here that I will explain once we come back to the macro. And finally, the easy thing, we're going to output the price in a message box so we can see it. Okay, now let's go and find the class name. So we need to go to our web page. There it is. All right, now very easy if you're in Chrome. This also works in Firefox. You can find the identification for any element in a web page if you right-click it and you go to Inspect. Now here's where I'm going to tell you a little bit about HTML. I'll try not to spend too much time, as I sometimes do. Let me get this guy down here. Okay, so you'll see these flashing. That means that it has been updated. So it's not a big deal. All the static elements, they aren't going to flash. This is when the price updates. Don't worry about that though. The important bits of data for us are what allows us to identify this piece of information. So look to the left here. When I move the mouse, you'll see that it highlights different sections on the web page. And if I look to the mouse on the right, you can see, so this div highlights the price and the percentage change and all of that. But if I go down a little bit, it highlights just the price, a little bit more, just the percentage change. So this allows you to identify the section of code over here that you need to pay attention to. And when you right-click the item and hit click inspect element, it's going to usually, not always, but usually, it's going to highlight the exact element that you need to pull in. So here we need the span, and for the span we have a class. Now a lot of examples will tell you to pull in an element by the ID because that is easier. However, most modern or at least large websites where you're going to be getting data like this don't use IDs anymore. They use classes. Now don't worry about why, but the one thing you should know is generally speaking an ID should only apply to one single element within the web page. So the ID will only be used once, that's what I mean. But a class can be used multiple times. I mean, the same class can be used multiple times. The same ID should only be used once in a web page. Okay, that kind of sounds confusing, but the point is, web pages have switched from using IDs to using classes to make their life easier. So let's get this class right here. All you have to do is go in between the quotation marks, double click once, and it's going to select all of it, and that's exactly what we want. Then we're going to hit Control C to copy that, and you want to get it, by the way, in the smallest element, the element that is closest to the price. So we're getting it from the span tag right here, because that tag is what directly contains the price. I don't want to get the class for this div right here, or this one, or this one. Div elements are used to structure web pages, but I don't want to get the div elements because then I still have a bunch of other crap inside them that I don't want. Get the span, it has only the data that I want, the price. Now that we've got that, I've done enough talking. Let's get off the web page, go back to the VBA window. We have our class. It allows us to identify the data that we want. Now let's go here in between the quotation marks, delete that, and paste this in. Now, remember that I told you, I didn't do a great job explaining it, but I tried to explain that classes can be listed multiple times on the same web page. So the same class, but an ID cannot. As a result, when we pull in a class, get elements, you see it's get elements by class name, there could be a lot of elements. So in this case, we only want one of them. And what we do here is we want to get the first element. And to get the first element in an array, not always, but usually, you place a 0 in there. So what we've done, I'm going to go ahead and delete this, is here we've gone to the HTML on the web page. We're getting all of the elements that have this class name. And as far as this code is concerned, there could be many elements with the class name. So we need to tell it which element to get. So we tell it to get the first one, which is identified with a 0. So open parentheses, 0, close parentheses. You could also write this dot item 0 like that. So if it's easier to remember, you can write dot item 0 like that, or just with a parentheses. Then we can do inner text, and that's going to get the text within that specific class. Now it's a good thing to make sure, I almost forgot to mention, it's a good thing to make sure that you only have this class once within the code over here. Now I know this code is only going to have it once, but you should probably check this for your web page. So I'm going to go over here, click anywhere, just to make sure it's active, hit Control F, We have a little search window down here. And I find sometimes it's a bit finicky, but it can work. So we can type in the class and see how many times it found this class. 1 of 1. So it only found it once. But if it found it, let's say 5 times, and we wanted to get the second occurrence of this class, then we would simply change the number over here. Where are we? Number over here from a 0 to a 1. Now with this example, you're not going to have to do that. You're not going to have to worry about that. But it can get much more complicated, and I will go over many more complex examples of how to pull in multiple elements and things like that in the premium course. But now we have our web page. We identified the data we want. We understand the macro probably more than we want to understand it. We got the class. We understand HTML more than we want to understand. So let's run the macro. But wait, it's not going to work just yet. There's one more thing you have to do. This is really annoying, I have to say. We go up to Tools, References, and we need to make, basically, I'm going to say Excel smarter. So we need to give it some more information. What you need to do is you need to go in this list. It will not be at the top of the list, but it is in alphabetical order, and find Microsoft XML, then V6.0. And then also find Microsoft HTML Object Library. Now these are the two. The HTML Object Library you for sure need. The XML one you're going to need for a lot of things, perhaps not this particular macro. And if it still doesn't work when you have those two things checked, just look at the other things that I have checked here and go ahead and check them. Because I've had them checked for quite a while, and it's hard to remember which one applies to which. So if you have all of these guys checked, like I do, then yours should work just fine. Now, you may have different version numbers. It might not say Microsoft Office 16 Object Library or Excel 16 Object Library. It could say a different number. That's okay. It has to do with the version of Excel, essentially, that you have. And the same with XML. That might be a different version number. But don't worry about that. So check all those, hit OK. And now we're ready to run it. So I'm going to go ahead and run the macro just from here. But first let's check, or yeah, let's hit play. And you can see it's running it, 1.1322. All right, let's go back to the browser. And it's not exactly that price because the price is changing rather rapidly, but that's all there is to it. So we got it in there. Let's try it out again. Let's see if we can get it any closer. It's now 13.18. Let's see. 13.18. Let's see if we can do it. 13.22. So 1.1322. So two things to note. The website that I'm using does not have up-to-date data. And the browser isn't going to get the most up-to-date data because it has to wait to refresh. And the macro itself isn't going to get the most up-to-date data because it takes a couple seconds to actually run the macro. So definitely don't plan your life on getting the most up-to-date financial data from this. You should use something a lot more professional for that. That's not just some free Yahoo thing that says delayed price right here. But that's how you can do it. So now with this little tiny macro, you can go inside the browser and get pretty much any information that you want. Now this doesn't go inside the browser, but I meant you could go to a browser, find the information that you want, you can identify it by its class, and then you can go here and grab it. Now you can also, I said I was going to show you just a couple different ways. So we're not going to work through it, but if you were to use an ID, you could use like this, HTML dot, and just type get. And you can see the other things that you can use to identify the data by. So we have get element by ID. That used to be the traditional way to do it. Get elements by class name, by name, by tag name in S, and get selection. And most of these you're never going to use. Most of the time you're just going to use get elements by class name, but in the premium tutorial I'll show you some really cool things you can do with a couple of these other ones. For now though, let's go ahead and delete this guy so I don't confuse you. And here is our macro in all of its lovely, lovely glory. Now go ahead and make sure that you download this macro so you've got it on your computer, play around with it, ask questions about it, and it'll be on TeachExcel.com. But that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.